Uh, Dear students, so we are going to discuss today about the demographic transition theory from chapter number 2, the world population distribution, density and growth. The demographic transition theory is considered as one of the most important theory in population studies. Okay, it is a theory which helps us to understand that how the population has increased in different periods of time. Okay, how different countries has passed through different stages of demographic transition. Okay, as well as this theory, it also helps in predicting the future population of any country actually. Okay, so let us study in details about this demographic transition theory. See, in demography or in population studies, demographic transition is a phenomena and theory which refers to the historical shift from high birth rate and high infant death rate in societies with minimal technology, education, and economic development to low birth rate and low death rate in societies with advanced technology, education, and economic development, as well as the stages between these two scenarios. Okay, so in demography or in population studies, the demographic transition, okay, the demographic transition is basically a phenomena, okay, which tries to show, okay, that how there's a historical shift of the population, okay, from an uncivilized society to a civilized one, from a society where the birth rate was very high and the death rate was very high to a society where the birth rate and the death rate has declined. Okay, it also tries to explain the shift, okay, like the population, okay, that how it also it also tries to show that how the birth, okay, the country has progressed, okay, from an illiterate to a literate one actually, especially the women education. Okay, so according to this theory, according to the demographic transition theory, okay, there are three stages of demographic transition. Okay, that means a country has to pass through three different stages of demographic transition. Okay, and these three stages are the first stage, the second stage, and the third stage of development. The first stage of demographic transition, okay, the first stage has high fertility and high mortality because people reproduce more to compensate for deaths due to epidemics and variable food supply. Okay, so the first stage of in the first stage of demographic transition, basically the birth rate and the death rate is very high. Okay, both the birth rate and the death rate is very high. Okay, so this kind of society, it actually existed, okay, during the very earlier period of human history, means when the human society was not so much developed in terms of technology, in terms of health facilities and all. So at that time, both the birth rate and the death rate was high, and the people, they used to reproduce more, okay, to compensate for the death. People used to think that their children may not survive for long, so they used to have more number of children. Okay, and in this period actually, okay, in this first stage of demographic transition, the you can say most of the people actually, okay, means all the people, they were totally dependent on agriculture. Okay, the population growth is slow and most of the people are engaged in agriculture where large family sites are an asset. Okay, so in this first stage of demographic transition, the growth rate of the population was very slow. Why? Because the birth rate was high and the death rate was high. So suppose 100 people are taking birth, 99 people were dying. So there was an increase of only one people, addition of only one people. So just because of the high birth rate and the high death rate, actually, the population growth rate was very slow in this particular time period. Okay, in this first stage of demographic transition. And in this period actually, okay, in this first stage of demographic transition, the people were totally dependent on agriculture. Okay, so and they considered a large family as an asset. Okay, why? Because if more number of family members are there in the family, they can help in doing the agricultural practice. Okay, so they used to prefer large families. Life expectancy is low, people are mostly illiterate and have low level of technology. 200 years ago, all the countries of the world were in this stage. Okay, and the life expectancy of the people is low. That means the chances of surviving for a long period of time is very low. The people were mostly illiterate and there was a very low level of technology. Okay, so almost all the countries of the world were in this first stage of demographic transition. Okay, almost all the developed nations now, okay, 200 years ago, they were in this first stage of demographic transition. Okay, so every country has to pass through this first stage of demographic transition. Even India was a country before independence, okay, long before independence, was in the first stage actually. Now still today, some of the countries, African countries, they are in this first stage of demographic transition actually. The second stage. In the second stage of demographic transition, the fertility remains high. That means the birth rate is same, okay, in the beginning of the second stage, but declines with time. Okay, so when the second stage starts, in the second stage, the fertility remains high. That is, the birth rate remains high, but with the passage of time, okay, the birth rate, it declines. And this is accompanied by the reduced mortality rate. Okay, accompanied by the reduced mortality rate. That means the reduction in the death rate. So in this second stage, the population starts increasing actually. In the next half of the second stage, the population increases. Why? Okay, because the birth rate is declining. In the first stage, actually, in the first half of the second stage, the birth rate is high, death rate is declining. So the population increases. Okay. And the most important characteristics of the second stage is that improvement in sanitation and health conditions lead to decline in mortality. Okay, so because of the improvement in the sanitation and the health facilities, the death rate has declined. Okay, and because of this gap, okay, because of this gap means because of the gap between the birth rate and the death rate, there is a net addition to the population. Okay, the addition to the population is high. Okay, so the population basically increases rapidly during the second stage of demographic transition. So in the first stage, the population growth is almost stagnant. And in the second stage, there's a rapid increase in the population growth because birth rate is high, but the death rate declines because of improvement in the health facilities. Now the third stage of demographic transition. In the third stage of demographic transition, or in the last stage, both the fertility and the mortality declines considerably. That means both the birth rate and the death rate, it starts declining. Okay, so once again, the birth rate and the death rate starts declining, and as a result of which the population becomes stable. Okay, the population becomes either stable or the population is increasing slowly actually. It grows at a very slow rate. Okay, so you can see that most of the developed countries at present, okay, most of the developed countries at present, they are in this third stage. Like most of the European countries, they're in the third stage of demographic transition. The population is either stable or grows slowly, and the population becomes urbanized. Okay, so in the third stage of demographic transition, the society become urbanized. That means a majority of the people, they start living in the urban areas. Okay, they become literate, the education level increases, and high technical know-how. Okay, the technological level is also very highly developed in the third stage of demographic transition, and the people, they are adopting the family planning measures. Okay, and the size of the family is not large, okay, but the size of the family is small. In the present day, different countries are at the different stages of demographic transition. Okay, and in the present day, actually, depending upon the level of development, depending upon the level of social and economic development, different countries are at the different stages of demographic transition. Okay, so many of the Southeast Asian nations, many of the African nations, they are in the first and the second stage of demographic transition, whereas many of the European nations, okay, they have reached the third stage of demographic transition. So this theory of demographic transition can be better explained with the help of a diagram. Okay, so this diagram basically, it helps in explaining the demographic transition theory in a more better way. So here you can see, okay, that on one side, on the left hand side, the vertical line, it shows the birth rate and the death rate. Okay, and the horizontal lines, okay, it shows the time. Okay, and it is divided into three stages: stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. So here you will be seeing that the line from the number, here you see that the line which is going from the top to the down, this is the birth rate, and the line which is going, okay, like the lower line is the death rate. Okay, so in the first stage, you see both the birth rate and the death rate is almost same. So this is why the population growth rate is not so high. But in the second stage, you see that the birth rate is high. First, the birth rate is high, but the death rate has declined, improved. So the population high growth is high. But with the passage of time, okay, at the end of the second stage, the birth rate also starts declining. Okay, and in the third stage, both the birth rate and the death rate, it again becomes almost same. Okay, so the population once again becomes stagnant, or the population increases at a very slow rate. So here you can see that in the first stage, the countries like Bangladesh and like some of the tribal countries of Africa are there in the first stage. In the second stage, some countries are in the first half of the second stage, and some countries are in the second half of this first stage. Like Peru. Peru is the country which is the first half of the second stage of demographic transition. Sri Lanka and Kenya, they are in the later half of the second stage. And here you can see in the third stage, the countries like Canada, Japan, and USA, they are in the third stage of demographic transition, where the birth rate and the death rate is almost stagnant. The population is increasing at a very slow rate. Okay, the society is civilized, the society is urbanized, and the people are literate. Now, in which stage India is? You may have a question like, so India, in which state it is actually? It is said, okay, some of the geographers, they consider India, okay, has reached the third stage of demographic transition. But many of the population geographers, they consider that India is in the transition phase between the second and the third phase. Okay, that means India is in the middle between the second and the third. So within the next few years, okay, with the increase in the literacy level, with the increase, with the development of the society and the economy, okay, India will reach the third stage of demographic transition. And now it is just passing from the last half of this second stage of demographic transition, and it is just entering the second stage. So this is what about the demographic transition theory. Okay, so this demographic transition theory, it helps to understand about the population growth rate of different countries in their past, and also it helps in predicting the future population of different countries. Okay, so through this demographic transition, we can easily predict, okay, the country's population in the near future. Like in Bangladesh, we can easily say that Bangladesh is now going through the first stage. So in the second stage, within the few years, okay, there the birth rate and the death rate will reduce. It will reach the second stage of demographic transition. Okay. So this is what about the theory, the demographic transition theory, and it is the most important theory, okay, regarding population, okay, which helps in understanding the population growth, okay, of a particular area or a country.